Jeff, welcome to the show.
Glad. I appreciate you having me.
It's good to have you here. I've learned about you, heard about you. Dr. Gilbert, a mutual friend of ours, has told me about you and talked about you on the Success Hotline. And I thought, man, what a great story! What a great person to have on the show. And there's so much experience that you have that I think that will be relevant to the listeners. So let's just start with this. Why did you go to Franklin County?
Well, that's a long story. The short, I guess, version of it is that I came here first. I didn't know the place existed actually until a philanthropist from here in Mississippi came up to visit my classroom in Memphis and asked me if I would come consult him about possibly starting a chess program here in Franklin County. And while we were here talking about it, he asked me who I thought would, you know, maybe be able to do this kind of work. And I told him that I thought that of all the people I could think of, maybe I could do it the best. And we started talking about the possibility of me coming here.
So what was it like? You decided to make the jump and you went to Franklin County. What was it like in the beginning when you first showed up? Maybe that first day or first month. What was it like?
It was very much like going back to the small town in Indiana I lived in when I was a boy, from the time I was 12 until I graduated from high school. So in many ways, it was a kind of homecoming to me. It was a place that I already understood, although I hadn't lived in a place like this in a very long time.
And what was the goal when you got there?
Well, my goal was to come to a place where there was no real history or culture of tournament chess and things of that sort, and see how I might, given the resources that we were going to put in place here, become sort of a liaison between this community and the nodes of chess knowledge, the places where where chess is really happening, and start a conversation between here and there that didn't exist before. And that all goes back really to my childhood experiences in Indiana, where I grew up as a rural area and was sort of an isolated chess player. I was living in a bean field and wanting to play chess, reading about chess in New York City and so forth. But it might as well have been a million miles away from me.
Yeah. Why? Why go to Franklin County? Why take this challenge?
Because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, because I think this kind of thing is important. I think there's a lot of, as one person said, a lot of wastage in terms of education in the United States. There are a lot of people who get written off as not being capable of doing something. Um, and it's also, for me, it's great fun participating in that kind of thing, sort of, as some people might say, starting something from scratch or something new, and then creating something that's substantial and real. I love that challenge. You know,
Did you have doubt when you showed up? Did you have doubt? Were you uncertain about the future of it?
not at all. No,
Why
no.
not?
I Well, because everything had been lined up for it to work. Not only in terms of myself. I mean, I felt like I had a good enough idea of what I was doing that I would succeed at it, but also because of my previous work when I was negotiating coming here and creating this foundation that would work alongside with the school system. I sort of made a list of everything that hadn't worked well for me before and made sure that those things were in place when I got here. All of the things that had encumbered me in one way or another, tried to sort of eliminate those. And that sort of thing really boosts your confidence when it comes to undertaking a project like this.
So your prior failures and setbacks prepared you for this?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, the story of failure to me is an important one because when I listen to you talk about failure and I think about kids, younger kids, I think sometimes when you use the word failure, you also mean something like awakenings or um, birth pangs or growth. I think about a baby. I was talking to my students about it the other day. We watched your TED talk, and I asked them. I said, "How many of you have How many of you have been around a little kid before? Because there was a picture of one of your children was very young in that picture, right? And I said, "Have you ever
Yeah.
been around a little kid that's learning how to walk?" And they said, "Well, they all had it." And I said, "Have you ever seen them fall down when they're walking?" And they were like, "Of course." And I said, "Did you ever hear anybody say, 'Oh no, my baby fell. It'll never walk'?" Right? And of course, that's not true. What do you see when a baby falls? What do you see? You also see the baby getting up again, and oftentimes with a smile on their face. And you can see the baby developing its muscles. All of that falling down is part of being able to get back up. And so, you know, failure is essential as long as failure doesn't turn into some kind of a dead end or a cul-de-sac. There can be a real danger in failure. It has to be handled properly, especially when you're working with children. But on the other hand, it's necessary and it's powerful and it's wonderful if you know what to do with it.
Handled properly. That's I want to explore that for a second because
Yeah.
we all fail, and we failed as children learning how to walk. We failed as children learning how to ride a bicycle. We grow up and we continue to fail along the way. But I think most people don't handle it properly, or not as properly as they could. They look at it as a
Right.
reason that they can't succeed, a reason that they can't do something, right?
Right, because it fills them with anxiety, and they're not able to envision themselves succeeding. And so instead, what they do is think of failure as a kind of fate. When instead, what you would want them to do is think of failure as an indication of where things stand, but also as an arrow pointing to where they might be. So um, having someone around that helps guide, particularly a child, through that very difficult phase is important. It also turns out, I think, that when you're coaching children, that you also have to help the parents understand that as well, because the parents always want, what's best for their kids, and it's hard to watch a child fail. It takes strength to do that, and parents need to be encouraged to allow that to happen. Um, when I was a kid growing up in Indiana, I'd already learned how to play chess back in Indiana. I mean, in Ohio. I moved to Indiana from Ohio when I was 12. There was a farmer there with whom I started playing chess. He stood up in church one day and said, "Looks like a great day for a game of chess," which I thought was both a strange thing to say in church and an invitation to go beat him at chess, because I thought of myself as being extremely good at it, but just because I didn't know any better. And so we went home, had lunch, and I went to his house, and I had already sort of pictured in my head this game plan of how I was going to beat him. And within, two moves, the whole thing had been flipped.
Hmm.
And four moves in, I was dead lost. And I was embarrassed and ashamed of myself, I think. But I was also, at the same time, uh, turned on and awakened to the idea that there was more to chess than I had realized up to that point. Right? It was like running into a brick wall or something. Playing this guy, he just knew so much more than I did, and saw so much more than I saw. So my response was um, kind of disbelief. How did he do this to me? I didn't like it. It was disturbing, and it made me want to play him again. And so I did. Probably, my guess is I don't have exact records of this, but my guess is I probably lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 straight games to him over the course of my learning. And he was a very sweet person who rooted for me. He wanted me to win, and he would loan me books and things for me to read. And I would go home and prepare and study in ways that I would never do for school, because I was so much more motivated by chess and by beating Mr. Raver. And I later, his desire for me to win against him was so great, in fact, that I later found out that he let me win, which disturbed me quite a lot, because I thought, oh no, that wasn't legitimate, right? He just gave me one because he felt sorry for me. And as a teacher, now I think about that sort of thing, how it is that you want to balance the idea of having your student feel that the task that you're setting in front of them is doable, right? Because you don't want to kill their esteem or their hope in doing it. But on the other hand, there's also the part of them developing a realistic understanding of how good they are and developing the kind of resilience it takes to bounce back from losses. So you have to balance those things. Now, eventually, um, my chess skill simply surpassed his after a while, and the relationship flipped. Um, but then what happened to me is interesting. This is a different kind of failure, and it's a problematic one. I was in a I was in an isolated area in which I became the strongest player, and that led to a very frustrating plateau, right? Because there was no one around to beat me anymore. And if I can't lose games, I can't get better. So in some ways, it stalled me out, right? I was in this big rush to beat Mr. Raver, and eventually, within I don't know 6 months or so, I could do that. But then it was a whole different thing because what you really need, and one of the things that I came here to do, knowing I needed to do, is you need to create opportunities for your students to lose certain kinds of games or to at least risk losing certain kinds of games so that at some point in a place like here, like Meadville, for the best players to get better, they have to play people who can beat them, which means they have to play somewhere outside of where we live. We have to travel to other places, maybe outside of the state, that sort of thing. But it's creating opportunities for meaningful losses, I think, that a good coach is always looking for, not places to rack up, you know, mountains of trophies and things like that. Although those can be short-term motivators and so forth. But what really matters are opportunities to lose really tough games and also to win them as well, right? Winning is also extremely important. But those losses, there's nothing like them because losses tell you that whatever it is that you think you have figured out isn't quite right. There's some other thing that you haven't done yet. There's some other part of your game that has to be developed. And so losing like that, it, it's one of my top priorities as a teacher, and also and having students take losses in ways that are helpful because otherwise losing leads to quitting, right? Failure leads to quitting, and you don't want that. And so you have to, especially with, I guess with children, you have to protect them in some ways from excessive losing. On the other hand, they have to do it.
Mm. And those children become grown-ups, and those grown-ups are listening right now,
Yeah.
and they're dealing with their own failures. And you mentioned your farmer friend. Well, I'm sorry, what was his name again?
His name was Mr. Raver.
Mr. Raver. Mr. Raver, you said he was a sweet person and he was rooting for you.
Yep.
And I don't know that we're always the sweet person that we need ourselves to be. We might be rooting for ourselves, but the language is coming out like, see, you're not, I told you you're not good enough. See, I told you you're not smart enough. See, I told you you don't have what it takes to get that promotion, to start that business, to write that book, to run that marathon, to whatever it is. Is it important to have that person outside of you? I mean, that's the role that I think that you play. You're challenging these kids. You're challenging them to you're creating opportunities for them to lose, but you're that voice that is saying, well, yes, you lost, but you can you can win if you do it this way, or you can improve if you do it this way.
Well, and one of the things I think that a good coach fosters is a community that does it so that the coach isn't the only voice saying it anymore. There needs to be a real an atmosphere in which the older children model losing for the younger children so that they're also teaching the idea that I lost and here's what I do with a loss. here's what a loss tells me about myself, and even allow themselves to say, okay, sometimes when I lose, I don't handle it as well as I'd like to. And sometimes, of course, in a chess tournament, I suppose like a wrestling tournament, same kind of thing. You have to be able to bounce back from losses because there's another game, there's another round coming just around the corner. And if your losses take you so low that you can't perform in the next round, you're basically almost dooming yourself in that sense, right? You have to be able to learn how to put those kinds of take put tough losses out of your mind for the moment and go do whatever it is that needs to be done, and then maybe later go back and reflect deeply on the loss. But sometimes the loss has to be sort of, put away for the moment. And older kids are really good at teaching younger kids to do that. And so one of the things that I try to do here is not be the only voice that's putting that message across, but rather create a situation in which it's normalized throughout the community that when somebody loses, like for example, you can see behind me these demonstration boards. When we go over our games publicly. And usually we go over our losses publicly. So everybody sees that everybody loses, because there'll be kids who will, come in here naively, they'll see there's a kind of pecking order of playing strength. And you don't want the little one walking in here and thinking that the strongest player is Superman and that everything in his life is perfect, because uh, that kid's losses are going to be compounded in a negative way. But if they see you going over a loss of one of the top players, and that top player being, saying, what they see in a positive light about their loss, it's a whole different atmosphere. So it's not based on shame of losing, but rather the kinds of gains and awakenings that can be brought about by losing. That's really, I think, where it's at.
I want to talk to the listeners for a moment, Jeff, because everything you're saying, I'm translating this from students to the listeners, right? Chess players to people trying to, raise their own kids, trying to parent, trying to teach, trying to coach, trying to build their business. Like, we don't see the failures. There's not too many people out there on social media sharing their failures, breaking down their failures and their setbacks. All we see are the successes. And that's what this podcast is all about. That's what my coaching is all about. It's pulling back the curtain and revealing that failure is normal for the strongest players on your chess team. Failure is normal. And for the listener, those people you see driving down your street with the car that you want, they have the house that you want, they they have other things that you're envious of when you see them posting on social media. They have their own fears, they have their own failures, they have their own doubts, they have their own setbacks. And I want you to recognize and not settle for less, not lower your goals, not feel like you're not good enough or smart enough or capable enough because of your failures. You are more capable because of your failures. If you create this, and my clients know what this is, this environment of excellence around you, of people who, it's not just the coach telling you and coaching you, but it's the others around you who are supporting you and lifting you up and helping you through your failures. That is so critical to have that environment. I mean, have you seen that, Jeff? Like that environment of students who you've created and cultivated, that they I imagine there's encouragement. I don't by any stretch imagine it's all rainbows and fairy tales, but I imagine it's an environment where there's support and encouragement.
Yes, there is, and there's also rivalry at the same time, right?
Hmm.
Those things go
Yeah,
hand in hand with each other. It's not
sure.
as if you say it's not all rainbows. But I was thinking about um, in a situation where we were at a national championship. This was with a team out of Memphis, and we were sitting in the team room waiting because we were, fighting for a national championship and waiting for one of the players to come back. And by his body language, he came running back into the room all excited and happy. And he immediately grabbed a set and sat down on the floor and started setting up the pieces. And someone finally said, "Hey, did you win that game?" He said, "No, that man taught me a lesson." And he wanted to set the board up and show everybody how he had lost. And I thought, okay, this is a sign of success, right? This is amazing, right? That this kid is happy, not about losing, but happy about the lesson. And he really, and the rest of the team got around it. They're like, everybody was okay. We all just got stronger from this,
Mm.
right? Your strong, your loss just made us all stronger. And if we can have that attitude as a team or as a community or as a culture, my goodness, there's so much lost to shame and other reasons for giving up, right? Rather than saying, let's circle the wagons around this thing and figure it out together, because that's where improvement comes from.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something you said earlier. You said there's so much wastage in education. So
Hmm.
many people are written off.
Well, I think that there are all kinds of ways in which that can happen. There are all kinds of preconceived notions about who is smart or even what being smart means. And that what I try to do with chess, because I mean, chess is an interesting thing in several ways. I mean, a person could be completely illiterate and still be a very, very good chess player. So that the kinds of ways in which we might recognize a kid as being advanced in school in terms of their reading skills and so forth might disguise in some way or another other kinds of ways that kids have of knowing and doing things, and things about their character and their grittiness, all of those kinds of things. And so with chess, I try, and I talk to teachers about this all the time. Don't try to guess who the chess players are going to be. Don't get confused. Don't confuse the straight A student with the chess player, because they may not be the same person. They might be too. It's possible they are, but just don't think about it like that. Let's just play and see what happens. Let's see who shows what. I mean, there are all of these hidden qualities in children that can be silenced by, again, preconceived notions of authority figures about who's who and what's what. When I learned how to play chess as a first grader, I was taught to play the moves, how to play the moves as a first grader. I believe that only boys were taught how, and that all the boys that were taught were in the highest reading group. And so when I think back on my own experiences at first learning chess and the ways in which I was taught that there were these kids who were smart, who had some kind of natural talent, whatever that might mean, um, and the ways in which those things hurt me, because I missed out on opportunities to play chess with a whole bunch of other people who might have been extraordinary at it, right? But I didn't know that, and it was meeting Mr. Raver and losing to him, right? I was losing to a guy who was losing to a hog farmer. Really was a bubble popper for me, and it was it has to be one of the greatest days of my life that I'd lost that game, because it changed everything. And it also um, gave me a deeper sense of how much I could love chess. You know, up until then, I thought it was tic tac toe. I thought I'd figured it all out. And playing him a few times, I realized, no, you don't know anything. And what a good feeling that can be, right? It sort of sets you free from getting stuck in this static approach to whatever endeavor you're engaged in, whether it's chess or something more, adult, related to one's career or anything like that.
How do you get your students to believe? How do you get poor public school students to believe that they can beat students from rich private schools who look the part, and this is a game that you would associate more with the rich private school, right? And how do you get your students to believe?
I suppose in my own My own contribution to that starts with the fact that I do believe in the positive. I believe that most people are smart enough to become quite good at it. So where you were born doesn't really determine that in my mind. I have this sense that it's more about work and training and the kind of feedback, the quality of the feedback loop that the student gets. That's what's going to determine how far they get, right? More than any other thing. And so I suspect that I pass that sense on to them. It's not some. I'm not Mr. Raver cheerleading for my students in that sense. I'm something. My approach is a little different than that. I have reasons to believe that they can go very far, and I've seen it happen, and I expect to see it happen again. And I suppose that that at least partly has something to do with it. But then the other side of it is you have to show them. They have to see it themselves, and it's not like you take them and show them, but rather you create opportunities for them to prove it to themselves over time, for them to develop a sense of their own power and strength. The first time I ever started a chess program was in Indiana. It was right after my son was born, and it was then that I decided that I wasn't going to become a philosophy professor, but instead I was going to become a chess teacher. And I was in a back up in the town I grew up in, which is primarily either farmers or factory workers. And that first year, that group of kids qualified to go to the state championship. And I can remember having supper and when they with the parents in Terre Haute. It was where the tournament was held. And I can remember the parents saying things like, "I never thought a kid of mine would be a chess player of this quality," right? Because the school had told them their whole lives, "You're not, get used to it. You're not going to be one of the stars. You're going to wind up in a factory, or you're going to wind up as a waitress or something along those lines." But their children's experience sort of gave them a sense that maybe that wasn't true. And I think so. It's not just about convincing kids, but also parents. And oftentimes in parents, I find somewhere deep inside of them, there's this little tinderbox of excitement and enthusiasm and hope that's just waiting to get ignited. And seeing your child succeed at something that you maybe thought you couldn't do because of messages you received from school or some other place, it can be a life changing thing.
You have these students who are going into a big competition, state level, national level,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of performance anxiety that I imagine shows up. Just like a wrestling
Yeah.
match, just like, making a
Yep.
big sales call, whatever the scenario, there's this pressure that we feel like we have to win. I sense that it's maybe somewhat baked into your coaching philosophy and your coaching style and your personality too. But do you focus on the process and not the outcome? Like, how do you help them deal with the nerves that come from the pressure to win?
Mm. Well, those are real problems for a coach or a teacher to face, and different children, of course, come from different families, and so you have a variety of dispositions already, within a team. There are some kids who feel a great deal of pressure to win, and there are others, and there are those, particularly those who've been told um, that they're smart or gifted or something like that, that sort of have this sense that they have to win, that they're just supposed to win everything. They're the ones that I worry about the most, because
Hmm.
they're the ones who've probably experienced losing the least, at least academically and so forth. And they're the ones who are the most prone to quitting. The other kids, like the babies who have to get up over and over and over and over again, they're more likely to take it in stride and to put it in its place. But with other kids, a lot has to happen, and there's a period in a development of a chess program in which it would be unrealistic not to expect a certain amount of tears to be shed, because those are hard experiences. Those are very hard experiences, especially the ones who are invested in, not only in playing chess, but who have invested in an identity of themselves as something called a winner, right? As in, like, I win at whatever I do, kind of thing. And that identity is a really hard one to keep up in a real world with other people who are fighting tooth and nail against you and who are just as capable as you are, right? It's an unrealistic expectation. And on the other hand, what maybe has to happen is that kids need to redefine what counts as success on some level so that they stay in the game rather than, abandoning it as impossible or not theirs or something like that.
Why do you think this has been successful? Like, I should say, how do you define success? Like, this has been a
Yeah.
successful program. Like, was there a moment where you can go back to and you can say, ah, it's working?
The very first day I was here, the first day I came here as a consultant, I felt, it's working. Because I have this sort of introductory lesson I like to teach. And what I'm looking for is a sense of the children being captivated by the logic and competition and sort of aesthetic beauty of the game. And when I look around the room, the first time I was here, I saw the kids getting it and I saw them invested in trying to figure out what was going on. And I could see the teachers or the principals that were watching me do this. I could see them getting it. I could see wheels turning and them making the kinds of connections you want to make. I always I always like to say that um, an ounce of demonstration is worth a pound of emails, or, or something like that, right? That showing somebody how something is done is so much more powerful than talking about it, or just, I'm saying, just telling them about it, or sending them a stack of academic research that proves that chess does X, Y, or Z. I'd rather just be in their presence and show them, and then, yeah, we want to do more of this. How do we do more of this? And when they're captivated by an interest in the thing, then they're going to become good at it because they want to, not because somebody's telling them they should or that it leads to some other thing, but because in itself it appeals to them and they want to be good at it.
Jeff, we've talked about these students and the value of failure in their experience, in the value of failure to help them grow as chess players, but also as people. We talked about you a little bit,
Hmm.
and you knew this was going to be a success from the go, and right from the beginning. Has there been a time when you failed? A time when you failed, and as a result, maybe you felt the self doubt that comes from that, and how you were able to overcome it?
Well, I have an abundance of it, of failure I could tell you about, I'm sure. Um, there are times, I mean, as a teacher, you have to keep an eye on yourself, right? And the ways in which you're pushing kids. Or the ways in which you're not pushing kids, or the kinds of ways in which you might invite somebody, even unintentionally, to think of themselves as not really belonging. And the way in which I would describe this particular failure came about as a realization of something that happened that I hadn't let myself expect. When I was in Memphis, one of our schools, these schools, the two schools I worked at the time were among the lowest scoring schools in the state of Tennessee, and one of them was taken over and turned into a charter school. And so I left and went to another school, and some of the kids followed me. Most of them were girls. We got to the new school, and there were boys there. Oh, there's a chess class, they wanted to take it, and they were sort of bragging about how good they were and how no one could beat them. And I sent one of the girls, her name was Tyranny. I sent Tyranny quietly over to play him because those girls had finished second in the nation the previous year, and these guys had no idea who they were dealing with. And so Tyranny went over and beat this kid severely in front of everybody. And he yelled out, "Where'd you find her?" And then he said, "I want her on my team." And I thought about that, what this kid had said, and how long prior to that in my life, until I had the experience of working with girls in those ways, going back to the circumstances under which I had learned chess, that I had failed for decades of my life by underestimating certain people for reasons that don't hold any water. So, and I'm always finding those kinds of things, little biases I have in myself that in some way or another get in the way of somebody else becoming what they might be. And I have to, you have to really check yourself in those ways. And it's wonderful to be around children, people who prove you wrong over and over again, and not wrong in like some way that you're like openly making a declaration about something, but rather just posing a problem, saying, uh, why did you not think this way in the first place, right? And so my work as a teacher is one in which I've learned to appreciate those kinds of shocks from the blue where I find out that I'm wrong, that I appreciate those things, and that I appreciate especially being around people who point those things out to me. Because otherwise you end up getting sort of stuck in a hardened shell, and you don't become particularly uh, good at growing. And so, I'm just very thankful that I've been in situations where people have set me straight, like those girls did. And like they did that boy too. I could see a lot of myself in him. I thought, boy, when I was his age, I would have acted the same way.
For the listeners, I want you to recognize these own failures that you have, these own biases that you have about others and about yourself. And I want you to challenge those. Always be looking out to challenge those. Jeff, absolutely fascinating conversation. I could talk to you for hours. I appreciate you making time to come on the show.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
All right, I wanted to record a quick addendum to the episode because Dr. Bulington mentioned that Bobby Poole, who was a real asset to the program, recently passed away. So, Dr. Billington, Jeff, uh, Bobby Poole passed away. He was a critical piece, a critical element for you as a teacher, but also for the students as learners. Tell us about him.
Yeah, yeah. And I think he's a symbol of what we need a lot more of in certainly in chess education for beginners and such. Bobby was my next door neighbor, and he and I that's how we met. And I wound up hiring him after he attended several of our public library classes. He showed up regularly, showed a lot of interest in chess, and was always trying to help other people in the class figure out what was going on. And as he became part of the chess program, he took on a very special and difficult work role, which was fostering the skills of the beginner level players, and by serving as a kind of benchmark for them as to how good they were, so that he put himself on the line and started, competing with the kids, and they had a target on his back. Everybody wanted to beat Mr. Poole. We also had we used an online chess website which allows you to solve tactics problems. And the kids would try to, they were all pushing each other to see who could have the highest tactics score. And Bobby would be on there with them and say, and at the same time would be sending me texts saying, "Don't these kids ever go to sleep?" That sort of thing, because he didn't want to go to bed, letting them have a higher number than he achieved. So he would stay up as late as he could, trying to stay ahead of them. And likewise, for the kids, it created a sense of empowerment to the kids to be able to engage an adult in that way, an adult who was willing, brave enough to lose in front of kids without taking the usual, or I shouldn't say the usual, but a common adult way out when they lose to kids is to sort of laugh it off like they weren't really trying, or I'm really not that good at it anyway. But taking it seriously and losing, that's a different thing. And so he modeled on a daily basis if not losing, he modeled the importance of risking losing. And in that way, he was essential to our program because the kids needed to encounter somebody, particularly an adult, who was a challenge to them and who was at least at first stronger than they were, but who was willing to have a group of kids sit around and watch him perhaps lose to a first grader while he was doing his best. And so he would say things to me like, why do they play like Bobby Fischer when they play me, but when they play each other, they drop pieces all the time? And I would say, because playing you is of higher importance to them right now, at least. And you bring out the best in them. I mean, unfortunately for you, you bring out the best in them. You, as a player who's trying to beat them, that's unfortunate for you. But on the other hand, as a coach, you got to see this as just pure gold. You're bringing out the best in kids who might give up if they were playing a stronger adult player. But when they're playing against you and think, hey, there's a shot here, I'm going to do all I can, then you're really bringing something out in the kid that's going to help them develop as a player.
And for the listener, I want you to think about who in your life plays the role of Bobby Poole, and the appreciation that you should have for that person in that role. But also think about, how can you play the role of Bobby Poole in somebody else's life? Like, how can you play that role? How can you be that asset to somebody else? Be willing to lose, be willing to learn, start with the beginner's mind, and encourage others and bring people along and play that critical role. If you like this video, hit the like button below. But also, what was helpful? What wasn't helpful? What questions do you have? I'll reply to every comment below. And if you actually want to get all of the notes, all of the quotes, all of the links, all of the action items from this entire episode, go to jimharshawjr.com/action and you can download the free PDF action plan. It'll give you all the notes, quotes, links, everything from the entire episode. You'll also get access to all of the action plans from all of my episodes of the Success Through Failure podcast. And if you want to learn how you can actually apply this learning to your life, figure out how you can start getting results now, you can actually sign up for a free one-time coaching call with me. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/apply. That's jimharshawjr.com/apply. It's a very quick, short application process. Find a time on my calendar, fill out the questionnaire, and you and I will have a conversation about how you can start getting results in your life by applying what you've learned. I look forward to talking to you.